Hi guys, welcome to your first lesson for the novel Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. You should have received a book from me. It probably looks like this one. I do have another book that looks a little bit different, and if you got that one, I apologize that the pages may not match up perfectly, and I'll adjust in the future when I know which one everybody has, starting to record my lessons before we're ready to have those books passed out. So I want to take a look at a little bit of the information before I begin to read today. And so first of all, the novel is called Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. We'll learn more later on about where that title comes from and what it's about. In the beginning, you'll be a little confused. Our author is Mildred D. Taylor. I do want to point out that this is a Newbery Award-winning book. That's what this big gold sticker is. And that is for young adult literature. So this is a winning book, and it's been around for many years, and it is a great story. So what I want to turn to is in your book, hopefully you have yours handy. Please go get it. If you don't have it, hit pause. After the introduction, as I'm flipping through my pages, there is this page that has the Logan family tree. And this is going to be very important for us to help not only keep track of our characters, but understand some of the history. So similar to the novel we read in the spring, Across 5 Aprils, when we were in 7th grade, where it was a historical fiction book. That book, if you remember, took place during the Civil War, and it was considered fiction because it wasn't 100% accurate, but it was based on this information that the author had learned from her grandfather, I believe. And I'm double checking because it's very similar in this book situation. It does not take place during the Civil War. So time frame, Civil War was 1860s, 1861 to 1865. This book takes place during the Great Depression, which we read some articles about previously, and the Great Depression was in the 1930s. So we had the stock market crash in 1929, and then the economy tanked, and we called that the Great Depression. So on this tree, at the very bottom, there are 4 names listed. We see Robert Stacy, Cassie Deborah, Christopher John, and Clayton Chester. And underneath Clayton Chester, we see Little Man. So these are our 4 siblings that we'll be introduced to right in the beginning of the chapter. And I want to point out this name, Robert Stacy. They don't call him Robert, they call him Stacy. And a lot of times people get confused and think that that's a girl, but it is not. Stacy is actually a name that could be either for a boy or a girl. Cassie Deborah will be our main character. She is the only girl. She's the sister. And then there are 2 other brothers, and Clayton Chester is always referred to as Little Man. So he does have a real name, but they call him Little Man. Above that, we see their parents as David, George, and Mary, and those characters will be important. They do list the other siblings. Uncle Hammer, Luke Hammond, is going to be an important character later on. And the tree does continue to go up. I'm not going to get into it too much now, but there will be other points in the book where they reference it. So one thing I'm going to point out right off the bat before we begin to read is you probably picked up from the picture that this is an African-American family. They live in the South. Slavery is not a thing anymore. That was abolished at the end of the Civil War. But we read about sharecropping and that kind of a thing. Most of these people have stayed on those same plantations where their ancestors were to continue to work. And we saw through those articles how sharecropping did not really allow them a way to make a lot of money and move away. However, this is a special circumstance. This family owns their own land. That is very rare for a Black family during this particular time period. And they are going to fight really hard to keep that land. And even though there's going to be other families or white families want to take it away from them, they're going to work hard to fight for that. So that's part of what our story is about here. All right, before actually I read, I'm going to share the worksheet with you, which you should have in front of you. So you should be able to see this worksheet. We're going to focus on 3 vocabulary words. We see the words indignation, meticulously, and dubious. Perhaps before I give it to you, I'll have more space for the page number. As we're reading it, I will point out the page number, and then I'm going to ask that you look up the definition. I might define it a little bit for you, but it's probably not going to be a perfect definition. You have 5 comprehension check questions that you will need to answer. I want you either to type these or to handwrite them. Either way is fine. But it's important to keep in mind that these are short answer questions. They must be complete sentences. I've got this note here about restate, answer, cite, explain. So that's our RACE acronym we talked about last year. Start by restating the question, but put it into a sentence in your answer. So something like, where are the children going at the beginning of the chapter? You'll start out with, the children are going, okay? But you need to give a little bit more than just that. So with that one sentence, you've restated and answered, but now you need to give a text detail and you need to explain it. So sometimes 3 sentences might be enough unless the cite and the explain are combined into one. And for some of them, as we move along, I'd love to be able to see 2 text details. Some of these, though, you'll only have 1. If you've got 2 questions in one though, like number 2, who is TJ? What was the burning that TJ was talking about? I need 2 text details, 1 for the first question, 1 for the second question. So that is going to be a longer answer. I shortened the number of questions. There were 11 for this chapter, but I've shortened it down to this 5 because I really want you to do a good job with these ones. We see on here part 3, complete the analyzing character worksheet based on Cassie. And then you can also use this for chapter 3. I don't have this on the computer. You need to have this in a paper copy, and I have passed that out to you. I'll refer to that later. I won't take the time to do that now. Okay, so I am so, why can't I stop sharing my screen? It should be up here. Oh, it's over here. I'll try to edit that out. If not, I apologize. There's another blooper of me not knowing where something is. Okay, so we're going to start chapter 1. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here today because I want to keep the lessons within here kind of not short, but so that you can do them in small chunks. All right, let's take a look at page 3, chapter 1, and I'm going to ask that you read along with me. And I always read the first couple of chapters out loud to my classes because I want you to get into the story. So please make sure that you read along with me. In the future, we'll decide, do we want me to keep doing the videos where I read, or are you going to read independently? But the first couple chapters we are going to do together. Little man, would you come on? You keep it up and you're gonna make us late. My youngest brother paid no attention to me, grasping more firmly his newspaper-wrapped notebook and his tin can lunch of cornbread and oil sausages. He continued to concentrate on the dusty road. He lagged several feet behind my other brothers, Stacy and Christopher John, and me, attempting to keep the rusty Mississippi dust from swelling with each step and drifting back upon his shiny black shoes and the cuffs of his corduroy pants by lifting each foot high before setting it gently down again. Always meticulously, that was one of our words, right? I'm just gonna pull it up real quickly. Yep, oh, so actually we had meticulously maybe before indignation. So meticulously is on page 3. Go to your worksheet, mark it down, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. So always meticulously neat. 6-year-old little man never allowed dirt or tears or stains to mar anything he owned. Today was no exception. So I'll point out kind of what's happening. They're walking to school. It is a very, very dusty road for the time that it is. But little man meticulously takes care of his clothes. He wants to be neat and careful. And he is lifting his feet really high, trying to stay out of the dirt so that he can still be clean. So he doesn't want to get dirty on his way to work or way to school. You keep it up and make us late for school, Mama's gonna wear you out. Think about, what does that mean, wear you out? Have you heard that expression before? Yeah, she's might punish him if he's late. I threatened, pulling with exasperation at the high collar of the Sunday dress Mama had made me wear for the first day of school, as if that event were something special. It seemed to me that showing up at school at all on a bright August-like October morning made for running the cool forest trails and wading barefoot in the forest pond was concession enough. Sunday clothing was asking too much. Christopher John and Stacy were not too pleased about the clothing or school either. Only little man, just beginning his school career, found the prospects of both intriguing. Y'all go ahead and get dirty if y'all want, he replied, without even looking up from his studied steps. Me, I'm gonna stay clean. I bet your Mama's gonna clean you, keep it up, I grumbled. Aw, Cassie, leave him be, Stacy admonished, frowning and kicking testily at the road. I ain't said nothing, but Stacy cut me a wicked look, and I grew silent. His disposition had been irritatingly sour lately. If I hadn't known the cause of it, I could have forgotten very easily that he was, at 12, bigger than I, and that I had promised Mama to arrive at school looking clean and ladylike. Shoot, I mumbled finally, unable to restrain myself from further comment. It ain't my fault you gotta be in Mama's class this year. So Mama's a teacher. Stacy's frown deepened and he jammed his fists into his pockets but said nothing. Christopher John, walking between Stacy and me, glanced uneasily at both of us but did not interfere. A short, round boy of 7, he took little interest in troublesome things, preferring to remain on good terms with everyone. Yet he was always sensitive to others, and now, shifting the handle of his lunch can from his right hand to his right wrist and his smudged notebook from his left hand to his left armpit to make his face as moody as Stacy's and as cranky as mine. But after a few moments, he seemed to forget that he was supposed to be grouchy and began whistling cheerfully. There was little that could make Christopher John unhappy for a very long, not even the thought of school. I tugged again at my collar and dragged my feet in the dust, allowing it to sift back onto my socks and shoes like gritty red snow. I hated the dress and the shoes. There was little I could do in a dress, and as for shoes, they imprisoned freedom-loving feet accustomed to the feel of the warm earth. Cassie, stop that, Stacy snapped as the dust billowed in swirling clouds around my feet. I looked up sharply, ready to protest. Christopher John's whistling increased to a raucous, nervous shrill, and grudgingly I let the matter drop and trudged along in moody silence, my brothers growing as pensively quiet as I. Before us, the narrow sun-splotched road wound like a lazy red serpent, dividing the high forest bank of quiet old trees on the left from the cotton field, forested by giant green and purple stalks on the right. A barbed wire fence ran the length of the deep field, stretching eastward for over a quarter of a mile, until it met the sloping green pasture that signaled the end of our family's 400 acres. It's a lot of land for them to own. An ancient oak tree on the slope, visible even now, was the official dividing mark between Logan land, that's their last name, Logan, and the beginning of a dense forest. Beyond the protective fencing of the forest, vast farming fields worked by a multitude of sharecropping families covered 2/3 of a 10-square-mile plantation. That was Harlan Granger land. So most of the families in this community work for Harlan Granger, and that's a name we're going to learn. Once our land had been Granger land too, but the Grangers had sold it during Reconstruction to a Yankee for tax money. So Reconstruction was the time after the Civil War. They didn't sell that land to the Logans, they sold it to somebody up north, okay? And that way they were able to pay their taxes. In 1887, when the land was up for sale again, Grandpa had bought 200 acres of it. And in 1918, after the first 200 acres had been paid off, he had bought another 200. It was good, rich land, much of it still virgin forest, and there was no debt on half of it. But there was a mortgage on the 200 acres bought in 1918, and there were taxes on the full 400. And for the past 3 years, there had not been enough money from the cotton to pay both and live on. That was why Papa had gone to work on the railroad. If Papa's not around, he's gone off to work on the railroad. And that was kind of a common thing at that time. People who needed work would go and work putting the railroad together. In 1930, the price of cotton dropped. And so in the spring of 1931, Papa set out looking for work, going as far north as Memphis and as far south as the Delta country. He had gone west, too, into Louisiana. He worked the remainder of the year away from us, not returning until the deep winter when the ground was cold and barren. The following spring, after the planting was finished, he did the same. Now it was 1933, and Papa was again in Louisiana laying track. I asked him once why he had to go away, why the land was so important. He took my hand and said in his quiet way, "Look out there, Cassie girl. All that belongs to you. You ain't never had to live on nobody's place but your own. And long as I live and the family survives, you'll never have to. That's important. You may not understand that now, but one day you will. Then you'll see." I looked at Papa strangely when he said that, for I knew that all the land did not belong to me. Some of it belonged to Stacy, Christopher John, and Little Man, not to mention the part that belonged to Big Ma, Mama, and Uncle Hammer, Papa's older brother who lived in Chicago. But Papa never divided the land in his mind. It was simply Logan land. For it, he would work the long, hot summer pounding steel. Mama would teach and run the farm. Big Ma in her 60s would work like a woman of 20 in the fields and keep the house, and the boys and I would wear threadbare clothing, washed to dishwater color, but always the taxes and the mortgage would be paid. Papa said that one day I would understand. I wondered. When the fields ended and the Granger forest fanned both sides of the road with long overhanging branches, and a tall, emaciated-looking boy popped suddenly from a forest trail and swung a thin arm around Stacy. It was T.J. Avery. Okay, pay attention to T.J. What is he like? What's he talk about? This is part of your comprehension questions. His younger brother, Claude, emerged a moment later, smiling weakly as if it pained him to do so. Neither boy had on shoes, and their Sunday clothing, patched and worn, hung loosely upon their frail frames. The Avery family sharecropped on Granger land. "Well," said TJ hauntily, swinging into step with Stacy, "here we go again, starting another school year." "Yeah," sighed Stacy. "Aw, man, don't look so down," TJ said cheerfully. "Your mama's really one great teacher. I should know." He certainly should. He had failed Mama's class last year and was now returning for a second try. "Shoot, you can say that," exclaimed Stacy. "You don't have to spend all day in a classroom with your mama." "Look on the bright side," said TJ. "Just think of the advantage you've got. You'll be learning all sorts of stuff for the rest of us." He smiled slyly. "Like what's on all them tests?" Stacy thrust TJ's arm off from his shoulders. "If that's what you think, you don't know Mama." What's TJ suggesting there? That maybe he'll be able to cheat? "Ain't no getting mad," TJ replied, undaunted. "Just an idea." He was quiet for a moment, then announced, "I betcha I could give y'all an earful about that burning last night." This is the second part. "Burning? What burning? Asked Stacy. Man, don't y'all know nothing? The berries burning. I thought y'all's grandmother was over there last night to see about them. Of course, we knew that Big Ma had gone to a sick house last night. She was good at medicines, and people often called her instead of a doctor when they were sick. But we didn't know anything about any burnings, and I certainly didn't know anything about any berries either. What berries are you talking about, Stacy? I asked. I don't know no berries. They live way over on the other side of Smellings Creek. They come up to church sometimes, said Stacy absently. Then he turned back to TJ. Mr. Lanier come by real late and got Big Ma. Said Mr. Barry was low sick and needed her to help nurse him. But he ain't said nothing about no burning. He's low sick all right, because he got burnt near to death, him and his two nephews. And you know who done it? Who? Stacy and I asked together. Well, since y'all don't seem to know nothing, said TJ in his usual sickening way of nursing a tidbit of information to death, maybe I ought not tell y'all. It might hurt y'all's little ears. Ah, boy, I said, don't start that mess again. I didn't like TJ very much, and his stalling around didn't help. Come on, TJ, Stacy said, out with it. Well, TJ murmured, then grew silent, as if considering whether or not he should talk. We reached the first of two crossroads and turned north. Another mile and we would approach the second crossroads and turn east again. Finally, TJ said, okay, see, them berries burning wasn't no accident. Some white men took a match to them. You mean just lit them up like a piece of wood? Stammered Christopher John, his eyes growing big with disbelief. But why? Asked Stacy. TJ shrugged. Don't know why. Just know they done it, that's all. How do you know? I questioned suspiciously. He smiled smugly. 'Cause your mama come down on her way to school and talked to my mama about it. She did? Yeah. And you should have seen the way she looked when she come out of that house. How'd she look? Inquired Little Man, interested enough to glance up from the road for the first time. TJ looked around grimly and whispered, like death. He waited a moment for his words to be appropriately shocking, but the effect was spoiled on Little Man, who asked lightly, what does death look like? TJ turned in annoyance. Don't he know nothing? Well, what does it look like? Little Man demanded to know. He didn't like TJ either. Like my grandfather looked just before they buried him, TJ described all knowingly. Oh, replied Little Man, losing interest and concentrating on the road again. I tell you, Stacy man, said TJ morosely, shaking his head sometimes. I just know about that family of yours. Stacy pulled back, considering whether or not TJ's words were offensive. But TJ immediately erased the question by continuing amiably. Don't get me wrong, Stacy. They some real swell kids, but that Cassie about got me whipped this morning. Good, I said. Now how'd she do that? Stacy laughed. You wouldn't be laughing if it had happened to you. She up and told your mama about me going up to that Wallace store dancing room, and Ms. Logan told mama. He eyed me disdainfully, then went on. But don't worry, I got out of it though. When Mama asked me about it, I just said old Claude was always sneaking up there to get some of the free candy Mr. Caleb give out sometimes, and I had to go and get him because I knowed good and well she didn't want us up there. Boy, did he get it, TJ laughed. So remember that Claude's his little brother. So instead of taking the fall for something he did wrong, he's going to blame his brother, let his brother get beat. Mom about wore him out. I stared at quiet Claude. You let him do that? I exclaimed, but Claude only smiled in that sickly way of his I knew that he had. He was more afraid of TJ than of his mother. I'm going to pause here for this video. I'm not sure on lengths here and there. So if This might be one day's lesson, and there's another video that goes along with this, and you can choose whether you do it on the next day or whether you do it with me, or whether you do them back to back. So hopefully that makes sense, and we'll get a handle on this. See you for the next lesson.